welcome to our session. Another session that we hope would be of benefit to all of you. Today, our subject is a bit different. It's about emotional intelligence. So we're still talking about competencies. And how can emotional intelligence help us navigate an unknown future? So this kind of establishes the fact that emotional intelligence is important. And that's why it became a main subject in our Future of Management Consultancy initiative at RCMCI. This, plus including it in the updated competency framework that we announced last year. I don't know if many of you attended the launch of the updated competency framework, and you would have noticed that a huge part of it is talking about emotional intelligence, simply because it is a needed aspect for leadership. It is important for team working and the relationships between either teams, clients, and between the leader. So it is a main factor for leaders. It is an important matter for career development, and it is something that would help us navigate the future that we don't know much about. So in a lump sum, this is what we're going to learn today, how this new competency that we should have as consultants, how it would help us and assist us in our future. Today, we have with us Antonina Kardasheva, and we have John Pellitteri. Both will be alternating in providing us the information and providing us with the answers to the question. I would like to first introduce Antonina because she will be our moderator. So after introducing her, I'll give her the mic. She's a CMC, of course, and a member of IMC Bulgaria. She's founder and executive director of the Foundation for Development of Emotional Intelligence in Bulgaria, as well as being the country coordinator of the International Society for Emotional Intelligence. And that's where John comes in. She holds a PhD in psychological sciences and is a professor at the New Bulgarian University. In her consulting work, she helps companies with strategic management and provides services related to group dynamics, training and soft skills, organizational behavior, and management of personal emotional investment. So she's the person to moderate this session. Thank you, Antonina, for being with us. And thank you, John, for joining us. And I give the mic to our colleague, Antonina. Please.
Thank you, Rima. Thank you, Gergana, for inviting Dr. Pellitteri and me to be speaker to this event. Can emotional intelligence help us to navigate the known future? Dr. Pellitteri and I worked for more than 4 years. He is a president of International Society for Emotional Intelligence, and I as a founder of the Foundation for Developing Emotional Intelligence, with the main purposes to help people to understand their emotions and to regulate them, how emotions can facilitate our thinking, and perceive the important information that they carry us with the social life. We both conducted emotional intelligence training and certified specialists. Thankful all of you that attending the webinar and give us the opportunity to share a piece of very important knowledge of emotional intelligence in these days, which the professionals in consultancy work. The spotlight these days, on emotional intelligence is like never before. Rather than a nice to have, it's fast becoming a vital core capability for the future. Business companies need people who can connect with others, can understand, can manage and regulate emotions. And that's particularly true when it comes to consult business owners. Technology, pricing, expertise and experience are all key ingredients for success, But emotional intelligence really gives us the powerful approach for consultants. I'm sure that you have heard and know these sentences in our consultancy work. They are well spread in our different cultures and business environment, especially in our work. Dear all, I know that they're familiar to you, and we are taught that emotions should be felt and expressed in carefully controlled way. I underline controlled ways because many people think that it have to be. And then only certain environments and in certain times. I can say that to some extent, yes, but well spread is the opinion that our emotions, sorry, but something, well spread is the opinion that we have to freeze our emotions in the business, or it is considered terribly unprofessional to express emotion while on the job. We all believe that our biggest mistakes and regrets are due to being overly emotional. The times when our emotions get the better of us. We know that emotions are our remnants from 300 million years ago, when they were very necessary for us to survival over our species. Human brains have gotten bigger and more complex. The emotion centers of the brain are not relegated to a secondary place in our thinking and reasoning, but instead they are integral part of what it means to adapt, think, reason, and be intelligent. True adaptation does not only mean able to pursue purposes independently of what is going on the current environment. It is also mean being open to and taking advantage of an unexpected opportunities that arise around us. The fundamental premise of emotional intelligence is that emotion is not just important, but absolutely necessary for us to navigate unexpected, to make good decisions, take optimal action to solve problems, communicate, cope with conflicts and problems, be healthy, happy, and of course, successful. While emotional intelligence becomes more commonly accepted and applied in management, there are aspects of emotional processes and their effects on cognition and behavior that are not always understood in consultancy work. That's why today Dr. Pellitteri will focus on what is very important and the idea that emotions are information and a powerful tool that consultant can use at many levels in their professional work. His presentation will go in depth into examining the meaning, needs, and potentials for action that is contained in the consultancy work. He will underline some strategies and skills for using emotions adaptively, and for creating transformation, for navigating the unknown. John Pellitteri is a president, as I said, of the International Society for Emotional Intelligence. He developed professional certification programs through the Training Institute. He is also a co-director of the Urban Institute program in New York. He is a certified trainer of Myers-Solvate Caruso Emotional Intelligence Test as me, and has conducted emotional intelligence workshops. I have the pleasure to work with him and collaborate in many activities. He is a professor at Queens College City, University of New York. John? Yes, I'm ready to give you the microphone. Here you are.
Thank you very much. I want to thank Rima Gergana for inviting me to this workshop, and Antonina for a lovely introduction. Okay. So I'll be speaking for about an hour, and then I believe we'll have time at the end for questions and discussion.
Mm-hmm.
So can emotional intelligence help us to navigate an unknown future? There's a lot unknown in the future these days, more than in the past, perhaps. So certainly emotional intelligence is going to be very valuable and very useful, not only in our consultancy work, in almost any profession. One of the important aspects of emotional intelligence is that emotions are so central to how humans operate. Antonina mentioned for millennia that they've been part of our human nature. And so since emotions are so central to how we interact with other people, that emotional intelligence really applies to so many different areas. But we're going to focus today on how we might apply it to our work as consultants. So I invite you to have a case study in your mind. Imagine a client that you have worked with. And as we go through the workshop and I talk about different principles of emotional intelligence, see how they might apply to particular clients or particular situations in your work. Okay. So the overview will talk what exactly is emotional intelligence. There are some misconceptions, so I'd like to clarify a definition of what is emotional intelligence. Then we'll talk about this idea of unpacking emotions. The theme today is how emotions are a package of information, and we need to learn how to unpack that package and gather all the information we can get from another person's emotional state. We'll talk about how we use emotions to transform. If we transform emotions, we can transform the social situation that our clients are facing, or situations that we're facing. I'll then go over some strategies and mindsets that we may be able to use that are based on emotional intelligence principles. And finally, we'll talk about navigating the unknown. Okay, now, since we're doing a workshop on emotions, I think it's important to begin with experiencing emotion. So we're not going to discuss it, but right now, how are you feeling at this moment, right now? We're not going to talk about it. At the end, we can, but what are you experiencing emotionally? Is it do you feel a sensation in your body? Do you notice your breathing? Do you notice your heart beating? Do you notice the tension in your muscles? Are your hands sweaty? Do you feel something in your back? What are you feeling? What images or thoughts are in your head? Notice what you're experiencing at this very moment, because emotional awareness is an important part of doing the work with emotional intelligence. We need to be engaged in the emotions ourselves if we're going to help our clients to also learn how to use emotions intelligently. So now identify the emotion you're experiencing, and let's plot it on what we call the mood meter. My colleague at Yale University in the United States, Mark Brackett, the director of the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence, he developed what's called the mood meter. And it started with children. He was developing a program on emotional literacy for children in the elementary school grades, but he's since expanded it to all academic grades and even beyond education to the business world and organizational training. So it's a simple but a complex tool, and we could all use it. And so the way we look at the mood meter, if your emotion is an unpleasant emotion, if it's unpleasant, it's on the left side, the red or the blue. If it's a pleasant emotion, we would put it on the right side, the yellow or green. Now, notice I say pleasant and unpleasant. I could say positive and negative emotions, but I try to be cautious, because if you say a negative emotion, people might think there's something bad about that or unhealthy, and that's not the case. Fear, anger, sadness, discouragement, all those emotions are unpleasant, but they're not necessarily negative or bad. So I might say negative or positive, but keep in mind that I don't mean negative in a bad way, or that positive is a good way. Now we'll talk how confidence and happiness are pleasant emotions, but they may not always be appropriate for a particular situation. So no emotion is good or bad. It's a particular state, and it gives us a package of information. So I try to use pleasant and unpleasant. So your emotion now will fall into one of these four quadrants, one of these zones. If it's pleasant, it's yellow and green. If it's unpleasant, it's red and blue. And then we want to think of the energy. If it's a high energy emotion, so if you're worried, scared, angry, irritated, annoyed, you'd be in the red zone. It's unpleasant, but high energy. If you're sad, discouraged, lonely, hopeless, then it would be an unpleasant emotion, but the blue zone. It would have a low level of energy. If it's happy, joyful, cheerful, enthusiastic, it would be in the yellow zone, pleasant emotion and high energy. And if you're calm, serene, peaceful, relaxed, you would be pleasant emotion, but in the green zone, low energy. And the high energy and low energy have to do also with our physiological states, our heart rate, our breathing. So we will actually get back to the mood meter when we talk about emotions as information. We'll come back to this in a little bit. So first I want to talk about a definition of emotional intelligence. And I'll begin by talking about what emotional intelligence is not. These are misconceptions about emotional intelligence. Some people think emotional intelligence is always feeling happy or positive. That's not necessarily true. Sometimes an unpleasant or negative emotional state is more intelligent in a given situation. And happy and positive feelings are not always appropriate or useful in other kind of situations. This idea that emotional intelligence is more important than IQ, that was the initial claim when Dan Goleman wrote his book in 1995. He did a wonderful thing by popularizing the term emotional intelligence. And it became much more commonly known because of Dan Goleman's book. However, to say it's more important than IQ is sort of simplistic. We need to have both. We need IQ, which is a general intelligence or intellectual intelligence, and we need EI, emotional intelligence. We need both. They need to work together. If you're emotionally intelligent, but you have a very low IQ, you probably will not be that successful in the world. You need to have both. And you need to have both the intellect and the emotional abilities working together. That's the key part. Sometimes it's referred to as character traits. Not exactly. Character traits are more about personality traits. And while there are views of emotional intelligence as a trait, I'm going to be speaking about emotional intelligence as a set of abilities. So it's not exactly character traits, although it's somewhat related. It is not mindfulness, meditation, or spirituality. Some people confuse that. These are wonderful. Mindfulness is wonderful. I try to practice meditation several times a week. I think they're wonderful activities. They can enhance our awareness of our emotions, perhaps, but they are not emotional intelligence. And to say emotional intelligence is anything that's adaptive or helpful, well, that's not true either. There are many adaptive things we can do that don't have to deal with emotions. For example, a little later, I'll speak about self-efficacy, which is a cognitive belief system, our belief in our abilities to do something. That's not emotional intelligence. It's an adaptive way of thinking, and it can lead to certain emotions, but it's important to distinguish other concepts, other psychological theories from emotional intelligence. Now, the definition I like to use of emotional intelligence comes from Jack Mayer and Peter Salovey, who developed the main theory in the 1990s. And this is based on their model. They have a very complex definition, and I like to simplify that definition to this. Emotional intelligence is a set of abilities for using emotional information in adaptive ways. And I'll look at all three parts of that. The abilities as distinguished from traits, emotions as information, and that's a key emphasis of what we'll talk about today, and in adaptive ways. Adaptive is another word for intelligent. When someone is acting in an intelligent way, they're being adaptive to the demands of the situation. And this is the Mayer and Salovey model. So we have 4 sets of abilities. So several sub-abilities could go into the preceding category, also referred to as recognizing emotions. We have to identify what an emotion is before we could work on it. Using emotions is how emotions influence our decision-making, our reasoning, our forward-looking, our planning. Now, I know many of you as consultants are probably working with people in corporations, maybe CEOs or managers, top-level people who have to make really important decisions. So I imagine some of you are working with people on how to make decisions or how to make better decisions. And so when you integrate emotions, when you use emotions in the decision-making process, you could likely create more effective decisions. You can't be all emotional. If you make an emotional decision with no thinking, that's problematic. Those are impulsive. Those decisions are usually bound to fail. But the idea of integrating emotions in our thinking and reasoning and our planning is what we're referring to when we say using emotions. The third category is understanding emotions, emotional concepts, emotional knowledge. So the idea, when we look at the mood meter, we had 4 categories of emotion. So for example, anger and fear, let's say, go together in one category, and they're distinctly different from, let's say, happiness, which would be a different category. So the categories of emotions, how emotions change over time. I work as a psychotherapist and a counselor, as well as a professor. But when I work with my clients, if some of them are feeling very intense, overwhelming emotions, I try to gently remind them, you're feeling this way now. It doesn't mean you're going to feel like this forever. Emotions change over time. And finally, managing or regulating emotions is probably one of the most important ability sets, because when we can manage our emotions, we could use them effectively and intelligently, as opposed to mismanagement or poor regulation of emotions, where then they could lead to undesirable outcomes. Now, another way to organize the abilities that has a more of a process view is a model I'm developing, the art of emotional intelligence. So A stands for attention. So that refers to recognizing emotions. You want to pay attention to emotions. Some people don't pay attention to emotions. I had a client many years ago, working with him and his spouse, and she wanted to come home at the end of the day and talk about emotions and how her day was and how she felt, and she needed to process her emotions. And he was just completely dismissive. Who needs emotions? So what? It happened, it's over. He was very dismissive. He didn't pay attention to his emotions. And needless to say, it led to a lot of problems in that relationship. So some people don't even pay attention to emotions. That might be a first step for you as a consultant to get your client to just begin to pay attention. Once you identify emotions, you want to regulate them. Now, regulating doesn't necessarily mean changing them. Sometimes accepting the emotion as it is and just sitting with the emotion. That's the type of regulation. Too often in today's society, at least I know in the United States and probably in other countries, people run away. You know, kids go into video games, or people go into drinking, or people run away from their emotions. They don't sit with their emotions, especially when they're unpleasant emotions. So to be able to just feel an emotion and be with it and own the emotion, experience the emotion, even for a brief moment, that's very powerful. Rather than running away, sit with the emotion. What does it have to teach us? So that's part of regulating emotions. And then the third part that I've added is this idea of transformation. How can we transform an ineffective emotion that's creating problems in a situation, transform that emotion into a different kind of emotion or a different expression of that emotion, and how that can lead us to change the situation, to be more adaptive. And here's where we line up the art of emotional intelligence. We line up these 3 stages here to the 4 abilities. You know, perceiving is lined up with attention, managing emotions, obviously, with regulation, and then we need to understand emotional information, and we need to use emotional potential to transform. Now back to the mood meter. So we talked about unpleasant versus pleasant emotions. So again, the unpleasant are the red and blue. Now, what information comes from an unpleasant emotion? Well, if there's an unpleasant emotion, regardless of what it is, there's a type of imbalance, there's a disequilibrium, perhaps a conflict, perhaps a threat, some unmet need, excessive stress. And when people are feeling unpleasant emotions, they may avoid situations or avoid goals. That's generally the information we might gather from an emotion that's in the red or blue zone. Now, the pleasant emotions, yellow and green, generally there's some type of balance and equilibrium. There's generally a sense of harmony or safety. Needs are being met. There's a reasonable degree of stress, if there's any stress at all. And generally people in a pleasant mood try to approach situations. So as a general sense, we have the 2 halves of the mood meter are giving us different types of information. It tells us about our client's emotional state and generally what they might need. Looking across the energy levels, well, high energy, red and yellow, there's more energy to act. There's an increased physiological arousal, your heart rate, your breathing, versus low energy, where there's less energy to act and you have reduced physiological arousal. So if someone is very sad and depressed in the blue zone, they want to stay in bed. They don't want to get out. They don't want to go to work. Right? If someone's calm and content and they're doing meditation, they would sit very peacefully and relaxed, but there's low energy. Versus someone who's angry or someone who's afraid, has a lot of energy and they're going to take some type of action. Someone who's happy and cheerful and joyful, they also have high energy. And interestingly, that the physiological components of an emotion correspond to these. Now, a higher heart rate for red and yellow, faster breathing, lower heart rate, slower breathing for the blue and the green zones. So again, the mood meter is a simple tool. As I said, children in elementary school were able to use it, but it's also very useful and very powerful, and you can look at it from many different complex ways. And it's a good way to map our emotions and to give us a sense of the potential in that emotion. This is part of the emotions as information. So we think here, high energy unpleasant, high energy pleasant, low energy unpleasant, low energy pleasant. What does this mean? If someone is, if your client, and imagine a client you're working with now in your consulting work and a client is in one of these moods, what does that tell you about that client? What could they do? What's their action potential? What do they need? I'm sure you've had clients in most, if not all, of these moods at different times. How did you handle them? How did you interact with them? And again, you probably do strategies and skills that involve emotional intelligence. You may not realize that they're connected to emotional intelligence. So this is a way to give you, hopefully I give you some new tools and perspectives in this workshop. But even if I say things that you already know, it's a way to think of it in a deeper way and use it more effectively. So we talked about emotional intelligence in as a set of abilities, and emotional intelligence as a package of information. But how do we use emotions in adaptive ways? Right? We sometimes have to generate an emotion. All right, if you're going to give a presentation to a big group of corporate executives or a big audience, you need to be in a certain mood. You need to generate a certain energy. You don't want to be too relaxed, but you don't want to be too nervous. So you want to have just the right kind of energy, generate a particular emotion with a certain amount of energy that's adaptive for that situation. That's what we call matching the most effective emotion to the demands of the situation. And like I said earlier, adapting to a situation sometimes requires transforming emotions and in doing so, transforming the situation. Now, the next part, unpackaging emotions. When we say emotions are packages of personal and social information. So what that means, first you want to look at the cause of an emotion. What created the emotion in your client? Are there situations in the person? Maybe it's something about that client's personal state. They're going through something. There's a certain style they have, something in the person, or the situation. Something happened in their office or in their company. So what are the factors that occurred that caused the emotion in your client? We also want to look then, what is the client's needs associated with the emotion? Every emotion has a certain need that comes with it. I mentioned the term an action potential. Every emotion has a potential for a certain kind of action. And I know in English, this works out. If you look at emotion, if you separate it, there's the word motion in it. There's a movement. Emotions move us. Even if it's a calm, like a green zone emotion, like being calm or meditative, your emotion is to sit there quietly, okay. But if you're afraid, your emotion is to run away. Or if you're angry, the potential is to attack. Okay, so every emotion has an action potential, and we need to look at that and work with that. That's part of this package. And the fourth component I see is personal meanings. What does this mean to that person? Is this part of a pattern of emotions for the person, a part of a pattern of social interactions? Is it part of a deeper purpose for the person, part of their own narrative? So what is a person's personal meanings that are connected to what they're feeling at the time? So these are some of the many elements and information that we find in an emotional state, and how now we have to work with that person who's feeling that emotion and sort of unpackage that. I've done many workshops around the world, and very often people seem to like this slide, so I've included that here. The causes of emotion, sometimes not everyone's clear. We know about emotions, but we don't know the specific causes. So sadness is generally created by loss. It doesn't have to be the death of someone. It could be a loss of a situation. It could be a loss of something in yourself. Okay, you could have your child grows up and graduates and moves on to live on their own. There's a sadness in that. You're joyful that the child's moving on and developing their adult life, but there's a little bit of sadness that the childhood is lost. So even if it's a pleasant experience, it could be a tone of sadness. Sadness is created by loss. Anger arises from injustice. When something is unfair, we feel angry. That's a natural human reaction. Fear arises from a threat. Now, it could be a physical threat. It could be a psychological threat. Okay, you're working with clients in corporate situations. If there's a problematic situation, they can lose their job. Well, there's going to be a fear around that. Okay, disappointment comes from an unmet expectation. We want something to happen, we expect something to happen, and it doesn't happen. We're disappointed. Different from sadness, and sometimes people don't always distinguish the emotions very clearly. That's another important way of using emotional intelligence, is to develop a better emotional literacy and have a greater clarity of what exact emotion is the person feeling and distinguishing between similar emotions. Embarrassment comes from someone else's ridicule. Frustration comes from the block towards a goal. Happiness comes from receiving a benefit. And serenity comes from an absence of troubles, at least in that moment. So this is just an example of some of the major emotions and some of the causes. But it's important to think about that. Not everyone understands or recognizes what's underneath that's causing that emotional state. So going on, I like to think of it this way. Our clients are telling us about themselves and their needs without words, but through their emotions. When they're expressing an emotion, or if we recognize that emotion, they're telling us something about themselves. They may not even know they're saying that to us. We need to listen deeply. This is an important skill, certainly in counseling and psychotherapy where I work, and some of the consulting work I've done, and all of you as consultants. Listening deeply, as you probably know, is very important, but not just deeply to what the person is saying, to the content of what they mean, but listen deeply to the emotions underneath what they're saying, and to show empathy, to show an understanding of those emotions. That's an important part of building rapport. I mean, counseling and consulting are not necessarily that different, at least at the interpersonal level. You're developing rapport and empathy and a connection with your clients. And when they feel that you understand them, that's a foundation for working together. So that deep emotional empathic listening is critical in any kind of work. We need to be detectives to decipher the codes, to unlock the individual meanings and potentials for the clients to recognize. Again, not everyone always recognizes exactly what they're feeling, or they're not always clear about what they're feeling. So as a consultant, when you could bring that clarity and help them to identify exactly what the feeling is, that knowledge, that awareness is powerful, and that's part of emotional intelligence. And decipher what is in that emotion. What do they need? What is the cause? What are the personal meanings? We need to look deeper, and that comes from our deep listening and our reflection and empathy back to the client to help them to be more aware. And here we talk about the famous iceberg theory from psychoanalytic psychology, but clients may hold unresolved feelings, traumas even, other kinds of emotions below the level of awareness. So the conscious mind is above the surface. We could consciously think of that. Subconscious is easy to access. You could tap into that. Unconscious stuff is much deeper. You might need psychoanalysis to get to that, and that's not what we're doing here. But the idea is certain emotions may be implicit and not easily recognized, but if you dip a little bit below the surface, you might uncover some of the emotions that are down here in that pre-conscious mind. Now, not that you're doing psychotherapy with clients, however, when there are unconscious dynamics, traumas, unresolved feelings, or things like that, they can have an influence on the person's thinking and behaviors. And it could be the cause of what's getting them into trouble. So you need to at least be mindful and respectful and open to the idea that us as people, as consultants and therapists and teachers, we are not always aware of all our emotions, and clients are not always aware of their emotions. So at least have an openness to consider what's under the surface that we're not aware of. And if you could bring some of that to the surface, then you have a better grasp on that. I'm going to talk about a case study of someone I worked with in a corporate setting. Okay, this was a client, and we'll talk in this context. I'll talk about how he transformed his emotions and how that improved his situation. This client worked for a customer relations position in a large family-owned company, but he was seen by management as disruptive. And as an example, he was giving criticizing remarks about the company in public. And the client's grandfather was the founder of the company, and his uncles were the CEOs. Now, rather than be fired, and I think in any other case, he probably would have been fired, but because he was a family member, they put him on probation and they sent him to me to do counseling. Okay. Now, these are some of the skills I use and how they worked in the work with this client. I recognize his emotions. He felt disrespected. He felt unappreciated. He felt misunderstood. And here, the empathy from me was powerful in helping him to clarify, like I was just saying, clarify exactly what the person is feeling. When we have a clear sense of our feelings, we can work with them. When they're vague or unclear, it's hard to work with those emotions, but they still influence us. So the recognizing emotion skill was useful in clarifying what he felt. The understanding emotions, well, he had a passion and enthusiasm for the company. He really loved his work. He had excellent relationships with the clients. He was in sales and promoting the company, but he felt he was not recognized or valued. So I wanted to, again, what was the cause of feeling unappreciated? It was the reactions of the management towards him. But I also identified a positive emotion, a pleasant emotion. He had pride for the company and enthusiasm. Also underneath this, he believed that his, he believed that his mother, who was the daughter of the founder, his grandfather founded the company, he believed his mother was cheated out of a larger role of the company. And so there was a sense of anger underneath there. So that was also a layer here. There was a family-owned company and he felt his mom had been cheated. So that was another set of emotions to deal with. Now, in teaching him how to manage his emotions, we worked on separating the personal meaning. That was his dedication to the work. Separate the good, pleasant, positive feelings about his work from the management. Regardless of how the management thought of him, he had pride in what he was doing. He believed in it. The work had its own value for him. And in many ways, he was connected to his grandfather's vision. So he felt sort of this ancestry, this family connection to his grandfather's vision. And that was purposeful and meaningful to him. So he identified that and made sure that could exist for him separate from what other people said or thought about him. I also taught him how to disengage from feelings when he was angry or insulted, because that was getting him into trouble. He was acting out his negative feelings. So I taught him a basic regulation skill. Identify what you're feeling. If you're feeling angry or insulted, step away. Keep your mouth shut, step away. Those are the behaviors, because otherwise he was going to get himself into more trouble. So that was an important skill. The emotional management was an important skill for him. And finally, emotional planning or using emotions. Well, I tried to get him to see the management's perspective of him. He was an annoying worker. I didn't tell him that, but he was annoying to the company. I could see how the things he was doing, the management was getting frustrated and upset with him. So I tried to get him to see that. He was able to recognize how his behaviors had an impact on how others saw him and how others reacted to him. So that was an important insight, an important perspective. And we strategized ways of how to communicate in a respectful way to the superiors and convey his dedication to the company and express in an appropriate way what he really needed. So we worked on that kind of communication skills. He also identified one supervisor who did like him, who wasn't upset at him, actually understood him. So that was an important resource in the environment for him. Now it's important because he's working in this company, and all of you working as consultants for people in companies. Sometimes you get to work with the whole company, you get to see the team. So that's a big advantage. You could see the person in that context. In my case, that was one of the challenges. I wasn't in the company. I didn't see anybody else. I only got to work with the client. So that was a disadvantage and a challenge for our work. I could only hear his version and not talk to other people necessarily around him. The client's personal sensitivities were a challenge, his need for recognition, for being valued. That created his intense emotions. So someone would say something, and because he was so sensitive, he felt it more intensely. So that was an issue we had to work with as well. You know, maybe his emotions were a little more intense than they needed to be in a particular situation. And we only had a limited number of counseling sessions. He probably would have benefited if we could have worked more. I think we worked about 3 months together. The outcome was generally good. He was not fired. And the changes in his emotions led him to have a new way of being in the company. We transformed his emotions, and we were able to transform his way of working with other people. It's unknown to what degree the strategies were sustained over time. There's no follow-up. So I don't know if he continued using those strategies. I hope he did. That would have been to his benefit. And we also got to look beyond work. You know, what were some other sources of meaning in his life? His relationships, hobbies, he liked traveling. So engaged in areas of meaning that benefited his whole well-being. You know, we're not just our job or what we do at work. A human being is multiply complex, and we have many dimensions. There's many aspects of our lives. So it's important to tap into multiple types of meaning. So I believe it was somewhat successful. Again, I don't know the follow-up. I hope he continued with that. Let's look briefly at the process of change. And again, this is from a counseling perspective, but I believe the same process could be applied to a consulting perspective. I recognized and identified his emotions, and we discussed his emotions. In discussing emotions in our session, he was able to experience them. And it's very important. When you could experience something in the moment, you could work with it. If we talk about emotions in an abstract way, that's not going to be as effective. You're not going to be able to work with the emotions or change them if it's just some intellectual discussion. It was good that he was able to experience feeling discouraged, feeling disrespected, feeling sad in some ways, feeling hurt. We worked with that. Now, in those emotional states, okay, how are those emotions affecting the way he thinks? How is his thinking affecting the emotion? So we were able to experience the emotions and work with the emotion to process that emotion. And ideally to integrate emotions with thinking and reasoning. Like I said, if you just act out with emotions and no thinking, there's going to be a lot of problems. If you're just intellectualized and have no emotional experiences, that's also very empty. So when you integrate thinking and feeling, you have a more rounded, more comprehensive reaction to the situation, to the other people and to yourself. And by transforming his emotions, finding positivity in his value and work, regardless of what other people said, finding meaning in his life, transforming emotions helped him to develop a better perspective, a new perspective, a new way of thinking about being at work that was more adaptive and intelligent. And this led to changes in his behavior and his thinking. So again, this is just one process. It doesn't always work exactly like this, but this is one way that working with the emotion led to a transformation in the person, which in turn led to a transformation in the work environment. So now I want to go through some mindsets and what I call skill sets or strategies for adaptive workplace. Rather than the phrase, don't just stand there, do something, a more reflective and hopefully intelligent response could be, don't just do something, stand there. Meaning, reflect, think, and feel. Sometimes we're so quick to get things done and reach a goal. Sometimes take a moment, pause, breathe, just be in the moment, even for a few seconds, even for a few minutes. And then we could operate in a more reflective way rather than a reactive way. That's a general mindset that I find very useful. It's something when I've consulted with people and did counseling with people, that's something that I try to help them to develop as well. And this is part of emotional regulation. Be with the feel. What am I experiencing right now? Let me sit with it. Let me just let it absorb. Let it sink in. And then I'll make a more thoughtful, reflective, and intelligent response based on that. For, again, a set of strategies here. Develop a mindset for being attentive to emotions. Like I said, some people are not very attentive to emotions. So you need to bring that. If you want to work from an emotionally intelligent perspective, pay more attention to what people are feeling. Pay attention to what you're feeling. So be attentive. Feel or sense your own and others' emotions and reason through, like I said, unpackaging the emotions. Reason through to understand the meanings, the causes, and the needs. Once you recognize an emotion, then unpackage that emotion. What is underneath that? What does it mean? What are the causes? What is my potential here with this emotion? Okay. Plan emotional problem solving strategies. So thinking through what could happen. Okay, unproductive emotions or emotions that lead to increased problems in the workplace or in any situation. And what would be a more adaptive emotion? What would be a more productive emotion to feel? You know, what is the task at hand? And we want to match the emotion. That's the ability set of using or facilitating emotions. Okay, manage your own emotional intensity so you can see the actual problem clearly. Sometimes people get so emotional and then they don't see situations clearly. They're reacting and the situation becomes way worse than it really is. And they make the situation worse than it really is. And so you want to see things clearly. You need to be in a contained emotional state, a balanced emotional state. Not restricting your emotions, but not being overwhelmed by them. And when I say in my counseling clients, feelings are just feelings and not necessarily reality. Okay, I'm feeling a certain way, okay, but the problem may be something outside myself that needs to be addressed, regardless of how I feel. Build positive interpersonal relationships. Okay, you probably know this as a consultant. You have a lot of skills in working with people. This may be common sense, but you show respect to receive respect. And again, that was something I worked with my client. He was not feeling respected by the managers, but he was not being respectful to them either. So to get him to show respect was hopefully an interpersonal dynamic to help him receive respect. Convey appreciation. Use empathy and understanding. So trying to get him to see the manager's perspectives of him, for him to be more empathic to them was a useful tool for him to use. So those positive interpersonal relationships obviously are key in many situations. Take a broad view of the whole work environment. Okay, it's not simply the individual person. And obviously, again, this is common sense, you know this. The individual, their particular role and responsibilities, the power and status they may have, the power and status of others around them. What is the whole work environment? What's the whole organizational perspective? Again, emotional intelligence is important, but it's not everything. You can't use only emotional intelligence. You need to use many other skill sets, and taking an organizational view and looking at the whole context is certainly an important perspective in which to apply emotional intelligence skills. Be flexible. That's a key ingredient. Be willing to adjust your point of view, your frame of thinking, or your behaviors. If something's not working with the client, be flexible, try something else. Or if a client's trying something that's not working, help the client to be more flexible. That's a key. That's being flexible is being adaptive, and it's being intelligent. Reframe new perspectives. So as an example, a demanding boss can also be seen as someone who's committed and responsible and determined to meet goals. We're not denying that this boss is demanding and it's making all the workers uncomfortable and frustrated and stressed. We don't want to deny that reality, but we want to take a different perspective. Well, you know, this boss really wants to get the job done. So maybe there's something good in that. So you could reframe from different perspectives, gives you different ways of thinking and different ways of responding to a situation or to a person. Certainly empathy is critical. Understanding what someone's feeling and conveying that feeling is important. Validating other people's feelings. Practicing self-respect. Okay, so if you're working with the group, you want to have a sense of respectfulness between everyone in the group. Okay, I had to teach my client to be more respectful to the management. I was modeling respect towards my client. Okay, be committed to that, but also not at the expense of your well-being. I mean, if my client was feeling deeply insulted, that wasn't good either. He needed to show respect. At the same time, they need to show respect to him. Okay, so sometimes saying boundaries for demands that are unreasonable or unrealistic, that's a way of practicing self-respect. So these are just some scattered strategies or mindsets that I think could be helpful. Probably use some of them. Hopefully you could increase and expand what you do. And hopefully it can give you some ideas on bringing emotions and emotional intelligence into your consulting work. And now for the last part, navigating the unknown future. Look at that road. You're driving down this road. Imagine you're on a car on this road. How would that feel? What would you do? We don't know what's around that curve. We can't see through the fog. How do we feel? What do we do? Well, I chose the emotion uncertainty. That's a central emotion, I believe, that comes with an unknown future. There's other emotions, but I want to put into practice what I've been talking about. So this idea of unpackaging a feeling. So we're going to pick the emotion uncertainty and we'll unpackage it now. What are the thoughts that could be causing uncertainty? Again, this is not comprehensive. There's many more things you could add to this. One thought, I don't know what's ahead. Is the future dangerous? Is there a threat? I wonder if I can cope or be successful with this future challenge. So these are all thoughts that may go on through our head. Other thoughts may also go on. And if you're driving on this road, they can happen within a second, a fraction of a second. Is this dangerous? Can I deal with this? What do I do? Those thoughts come to our head. We feel the sense of uncertainty. They create uncertainty. Uncertainty is an intelligent emotion. In this kind of situation, if you're driving on the road and you have this unknown future. Related emotions that could go with that, you could feel scared, you could feel anxious, you could feel worried, you could feel fearful. Many emotions that could cluster together with uncertainty and different degrees of intensity in those emotions. What are the needs that come with this feeling of uncertainty? Well, we need clarity. Okay, we need accurate information. What is ahead of us? We don't always have that. What emotions can help us? Well, if we felt confident, that would balance out that uncertainty. So again, here we talk about matching an emotion to a situation. I feel uncertain. I'm not going to deny that. But if I felt confident to some degree, I could balance the gravitational pull of that uncertainty. I could balance the energy of the uncertainty. A sense of competence. If you're a brand new driver, you're not very competent. This is very scary. If you're a competent driver, you're probably going to be able to manage it much better. We need support. We need resources when we're facing uncertainty. We could benefit from planning and from preparation. Okay. So for example, if you're driving down this road, most people would probably slow down. That's preparation. That's planning. I don't know what's ahead. Let me go slower. I'm adapting to the situation. I'm preparing for the unknown. And then action potential. So let's look at a few different emotions here and the action potential that come with them. Do we feel fear, which is a more intense emotion? Now, in general, when people feel fear, they avoid situations. They could withdraw, they could hide, or they could overreact. So fear, if it's very intense, can actually be very detrimental if someone's overreacting. Again, you're driving on a car, you get overwhelmed with fear, you could probably crash that car. However, if you have the emotion of worry, which is less intense than fear, you would act with caution, you would be careful, you would be vigilant. You're less likely to overreact with worry than you would if you were fearful. Worry is similar to fear, but a much less intensity. Now, I said before, what if we add the emotion confidence in here? Now, when someone's confident, they approach the situation rather than avoid. They stay engaged with the challenge. They don't give up. They persist towards a goal. So a confident driver would be going forward, engaging with the fog and the curve and the uncertainty and keep going towards their goal. So confidence would balance out fear or worry. Okay, now let's look at them mapped on the mood meter. So where we have fear is a high intensity emotion. So it would be higher in the mood meter. It's high intensity. As you said, fear could be detrimental. You could overreact, or you could stop and not be able to get to your goal. Worry is a lower intensity. So worry is maybe a little easier to manage. You're not going to get overwhelmed with worry the way you might get overwhelmed if you felt fear. Now, in terms of confidence, well, if you're overconfident, that can be problematic too. An overconfident person would just keep driving on that road and not adapt. That's not intelligent. Overconfidence is not intelligent in that situation. However, a lower degree of that, a cautious confidence, would be very much more effective. So in the sense that we what strategy we might want to do, and again, in a general sense, reduce fear. Oh, I think someone's got to put a mute on. Someone's unmuted. Okay. A strategy is we want to reduce fear to a less intense level of being worried or concerned. Fear could be overwhelming. Worry is more manageable. Develop the term self-efficacy, which is, again, our beliefs and our abilities to do something. That's really another way of saying confidence, but based on past successes, like I did this before, so I could do it again, and accurate self-assessment. If we're not accurate in what we can do, we run the risk of being overly confident, which could be detrimental. So an accurate self-assessment. So if we have that self-efficacy, I'm confident, I've done this in the past, I know I can adapt to the situation, I have a skill set. Confidence is a way of facing that unknown future. We don't know what's in the future. We don't know. We might still not be successful, but if we have confidence, it's going to be a balance to that, to the uncertainty. Avoid overconfidence. We have to have a respect for fear. Fear is an intelligent emotion. If you're worried or fearful of this road, that's intelligent. You should be. This is uncertainty. This is potentially dangerous. So we do need to have a respect for fear. Don't dismiss it. And don't fall into a trap of being overly confident. But a cautious confidence, if you think we kind of get confidence, but not overly confident, and we mix confidence with a little bit of worry, we'd have what I would call a cautious confidence. I'm confident I can deal with this situation, but I am a little worried and concerned. I'm going to be mindful and be attentive to what could be happening. That balance of emotions is probably the most effective, right? So we're not overreacting as in fear. We're not ignoring the problem because we're overconfident, but we have sort of a blend of cautious and worry. Almost I want to create like an orange circle over here, a little bit of red, a little bit of yellow together, make like an orange zone. A cautious confidence would probably be an adaptive way to approach that particular unknown certainty. Obviously, every situation is different, okay? And lastly, being flexible. We have to adapt and adjust, expect the unexpected. Don't be surprised when something comes up that we didn't expect. Well, things happen. That's the idea of an unknown future, an uncertain future, okay? And so lastly, I want to just give you an opportunity to think about how you would apply this. Consider some of the things we talked about today, what's useful for you, what might be interesting. Even if you've used something like this before, how could you enhance that skill set and make it even stronger and deeper? So consider points that are useful or interesting. Hopefully you've been thinking about a particular client or situation. If not, you could think about one now. And then take a moment to consider how you might use a particular mindset or skill set from the emotional intelligence models, how you might use that to intervene. How can you apply some of the things we talked about today to be more effective in your clients, in your consulting work? And so again, I want to thank Rima and Gergana and Antonina for inviting me. And we'll now leave the space open for any discussions or questions.
I'd like to just make a statement. When we first started, you asked John, what's your feelings? What are you feeling right now? Mine was anticipation. I was in anticipation mode, figuring what it is that I'm going to hear that is new, how I'm going to process it. And actually now I'm in the content mode. So thank you for moving me from that to here. It was a very good session. Excellent, actually. Thank you to you, and thank you to Antonina.
Thank you so much, Rima. I appreciate it. And yeah, we could have done the mood meter at the very beginning and the very end of the session to see how it changes. That's an interesting exercise.